Welcome to Compass Control Professional Online Certification Course Level C1 Plus Part 2, where we're actually going to be programming a presentation space GUI using the modular version 2.0 programming method. For those of you following along at home, you could use the corporate demo as your reference project. The project has, and we will be building, 4 scenarios buttons, 3 of which have selection macros, meaning events and actions will occur when I press those buttons. So for example, presentation will turn on the projector, drop the screen, select the default source as through my presentation switcher, and set a volume level on my amplifier. However, one of the 4 scenario buttons, the device controls buttons, will have no selection macro because it's just going to be an option for our power users to be able to view all the remotes of the control devices in the system. The contents within the scenario is just going to provide the needed controls within each scenario. For example, if we were to press the teleconference scenario, we will see the teleconferencing module. We'll see the content as a single device, also giving the user the ability to adjust the automation system, lightings and blinds. And actually in total we're only utilizing 2 out of the 4 content types. Those 2 contents are the AV endpoint and single device in this GUI build. Very, very important, this is on you, the AV contractor integrator, to make sure you are organized in your system design before programming this, because so much of the programming relies on connectivity and IP information. There is a certain amount of this you could do beforehand without having this information. You don't necessarily need to know the IP addresses or anything like that until wanting to make this work. But you do want to know things like the input connections and whatnot, so that we can make our trees with the appropriate connections, because after all, connections are discrete commands in our control software. Apple TV will be input 1 of our presentation switcher and controlled over IP. The video conferencing system comes from LifeSize, and that'll be input number 2 to our presentation switcher and controlled over IP. The podium and table laptops will be inputs 3 and 4 respectively. There is no control for those laptops. However, we do need to add their modules in. We'll spend a special moment on that in the Navigator software. And our teleconferencing system comes from Clear 1, and it'll be controlled over IP. It's going to be input number 2 into the amplifier, whereas input 1 is going to be any of our audio from our selected presentation source using the audio de-embed feature. Our master controller will be a CX800, which is a small 3-port master controller. Our lighting and shade automation controls come from Lutron, which we have to extract the XML report from the repeater of the Lutron system. Our projector will be controlled via RS-232. It comes from Epson, and the screen will be controlled via voltage triggering. The projector will be port 2 and the screen will be port 3 respectively. So let's go ahead and get programming. Open the Compass Navigator software on your desktop after installing, and use your certified credentials to log in. The software takes a moment to open, and if it is your first time opening Compass Navigator on your PC, it takes especially long because it's going to be linking to all of our high-resolution images. This is a modular 2.0 project. We enter the desired file name, or we go ahead and browse first to choose the desired location. In this case, I'm using my desktop, and we give a project name. This is something that the customer will never see, just the name for the file. However, we now go to the titles and images button there, where we have the project title, which is the headline on the home page there, and we can choose our desired image. All of the images from the demo projects are provided. So now it brings us to the programming tab, where we will work from left to right, beginning with setting up controllers. Here we're entering, adding a controller to the system. We choose iPad from the drop-down. We could provide a name, and we could add a device ID from the iPad if needed, or we could leave it blank. We are choosing a CX800 as our master controller, which we press Add Master Controller to add it. And lastly, after already having collected our Lutron repeater from the repeater, we've collected the file, we're able to add that in. We do have additional resources for how to add the Lutron XML report. So that brings us to adding modules. Now we're adding devices into the system which we're controlling. So we've added the Epson projector from RS-232 and the KeyDigital amplifier. We're now advancing to TCP/IP modules, where we add anything controlled over IP, including the Apple TV. The clear one, just choosing the brand name, selecting the model, and pressing Add Device. We head on down to life size, where we see the icon video conferencing unit. And the KeyDigital switcher is another TCP/IP controlled device. Now there are some devices that are not controlled in our system, the laptops. And for that, here in IR, we do have what we call empty devices. So we've chosen empty and then laptop, and we add 2 of those in for our 2 video sources, which brings us to add scenarios. These are going to be our scenarios buttons. The name ID is the name that the programmer provides. The button text is what the end user will see. We choose an icon. And now we have chosen to add a select macro to that button. So as I press that button, events and actions will occur. And by creating the select macro, by choosing create by name, that will occur, and we get to define what are the events and actions that will happen later on. So we've just created the scenario for presentation, and now that brings us to our contents, where we provide a name ID. Again, that's programmer friendly. The button text is user friendly, an icon, and choosing when I press that button, will something happen? And choosing power on when selecting will allow us to, when I press that, to power on the devices that are part of this content. So what devices are part of the content? We're going to move ahead to scenario construction. We add our projector, because as we switch for the presentation, the projector is the endpoint. The switcher, output 1 of our Pro 4x1 switcher, is connected to the HDMI 1 port of the projector, and the Apple TV is input 1, the icon video conference input 2, and our laptops are input 3 and 4. Now here we see in the properties the subname. Subname is what text will show up for the end user on the GUI. So instead of just having 2 empty laptop, now we get to see podium laptop, table laptop. So this is whatever text you'd like for your end user. So all of these input connections on the projector and the switcher are ultimately just discrete commands for selecting. What else did we have on the presentation icon on your iPad demo? We have single devices in addition to the endpoint. So single devices, as was defined previously, we're going to put the Apple TV there, because when we press this, it's going to basically be our means of showing the Apple TV remote, but also by choosing select macro, we're going to switch when selecting, and we've now are able to reference the destination, the AV endpoint of the presentation that we just built. So by pressing this button, we know now that this is the Apple TV device that is input number 1 of the AV endpoint. Additional single devices, giving a programming name for the lights, entering the button text. What is the icon that we provide here? Now we don't need to create a select macro for the lights though. Instead it's just going to bring us to our lighting dimmer or scenes keypad. So here we are in the scenario construction where we have auxiliary, and that's where we keep lighting and security and that sort of thing. Another single device to add to our system will be the thermostat. So choose the icon. So again, we're just building buttons here. We're defining what are the buttons we're building, and we're defining the properties of these buttons before we advance to scenario construction. And for the single device, we could say, okay, show us the remote for our thermostat from our Lutron system. And lastly, on the presentation, if you're following along on your iPad, is the projector remote, just in case they want to access other inputs or something like that. So choose the appropriate icon. And do we want to call some events and actions by pressing that? No, instead we just want to see the remote. So we drag the projector over, and now, because we've already defined it, we know all of the connectivity from the projector on backward. Save early, save often, as you often should in the software world. And now we've completed our first scenario. Our next scenario in the conference room demo is the conference call. So the name ID is for the programmer to reference, the button text is for the end user. Choosing our desired icon, and when we press that button, do we want events and actions to occur? Yes, we want to put the room into conference call configuration, if you will. Now here is an additional property I forgot to mention earlier. That is the volume device. You could choose any device to be your volume within the mode. So we've chosen the KeyDigital audio amplifier there. All of our devices were available to be selected. And if it's a multi-output device, you can specify what output of that device you'll be using within that scenario. Entering now the first single device, and that's going to be, the content is going to be for the teleconferencing system. So choose desired icon. And when we press this, do we want something to occur? If we want an on-off button visible, that's just a matter of having a green-red toggle button in the top corner of that. We're going to not do that though. And now we, through the scenario construction, say it was the clear one. That will be the device for that single device to be associated with. Next, we have the lights content that we want to be available under this scenario. Choose the icon, and no need for any additional properties, just instead dragging the scene keypad as we see it there as our content. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you a trick that is the lazy way of doing things, the quicker way of doing things. That is, just drag, if we have basically what it would be a duplicate, like we already had lights previously, and it's a single zone, so it's the same lights. Similarly, we already have a thermostat. So I'm just going to adjust the naming nomenclature here to fit, so I know that this is the scenario conference call button for the thermostat, so that it's going to be unique, because compass control really ultimately relies on having unique naming of objects. So we're going to use that a few more times, the copy and paste, and just changing the names, which leads us to our next scenario, conference call scenario button. Choosing the icon. When we press conference call, do we want to have a select macro? Yes, when I press that, I want to configure the room for that mode. And what is the volume device? And does it support a slider? In our case, the KD Amp 220 does. So what's going to be the first single device? That's the contents inside of this scenario. The video conferencing codec we want to have. So let's find an appropriate icon. And when I press video conference content, do we want something to occur? So we're going to go ahead and say yes, because we also want to make sure that if the room is currently doing something else like a local presentation, that we go ahead and switch into the video conference. However, we weren't able to choose an endpoint because within the scenario there has not yet been one established. So we need to build that here. That is information that the system references in order to allow you to move on and to have that easy builder function of referencing a AV endpoint and all the connectivity inside. So we're building the AV endpoint just like we did in the presentation. So by dragging the projector over, because after all, again, it's a single room, single display system, now having that defined allows me to reference that in the single device video conference content. And choosing it will show me the remote for our life-size video conferencing device. So again, go the easy way here and just copy and paste. Now this is really something I started doing after building my own contents and scenarios a number of times. So I'm very comfortable with already building that. So, you know, definitely put in your reps first. Make sure you fully understand before you take the easy way. But, you know, it's really just copying. If something's already defined and not changing at all, just copy, paste, and give a unique name. You could use right-click copy, or you could use Control-C, Control-V to copy and paste. So we're kind of showing two different ways here. If you see things kind of show up on their own with copy and paste, that's probably because I'm using the Control-C, Control-V shortcut keys. Compass Control supports a lot of Windows shortcut keys. And now we have the projector, the thermostat, the lights, contents all within the video conferencing scenario, as well as all the others. There's really no difference there, is there? So 3 scenarios are down. Take a step back, add another scenario. Dragging these things into the position is going to put them exactly as they show up on the screen. It's the content buttons are they're columns. So top left, center top, bottom top, or bottom middle rather. And this one will be bottom middle since it's our 4th scenario. And this is our device controls. So for the programmer, I've just called it DEVCNTRL. You know what that means. And here, the button text, device controls. What volume device? What device is going to be associated with the volume keys when I enter that content? Still the amp. And what was in there? Really just a bunch of single devices. If you look in your iPads and iPhones within the demo, the corporate demo, bunch of single devices so we could pull up the remotes for those devices. So since again a lot of this has already been defined, I can go in and copy and paste. There you go. So teleconferencing first. If we look at the iPad, that's what's at the top there. Video conferencing, Control-C, come on down, Control-V for video conference to show up. And just referencing that iPad again. And we even had the switcher device control. We have the Apple TV single device, so now we'll see the Apple TV remote option in the device controls scenario. The lights. And of course I will have to go through and change names on these. Thermostat and projector. So device control now is going to go in my naming. It's good to establish a naming procedure that is familiar for you and makes sense for you if you're going to open this project up months from now and take a look at it. But on these device controls area is really not configuring the room, so we're not creating selection macros here. Just going in and entering the name I want here. Device control, Apple TV. And again, why are there all these copy ones added at the end? Because again, in Compass Control is JSON based, so it's object oriented. So there's a need for a unique name for all of these items. So just keep that in mind if you ever get that copy 1, copy 2, copy 3 appended to the end of your items through Compass Control. That's why we need to have a unique name for these things. Very good. So now we have all of my contents button within the device controls scenario. We could even see that the connectivity tree is there in the projector. The projector, which leads backward to the switch, which has all the inputs connected. So that's going to bring us to scenario construction as we work from left to right. Excuse me, scenario construction is done, so we advance now to controlling flow. Controlling flow is more trees, but it's basically now answers the question, okay, if I'm controlling things, what ports from my master controller do they come from? We need to add our iPads into the screen. Here's our CX800. So there's 3 areas where we could drag these, and we just right-click the ports to configure them. RS-232, RS-232 for projector and amp control, and then port 3 as a trigger. CX800 is a nice inexpensive master controller, and as more and more devices are controlled over the network, we really don't need anything much greater than that. So the trigger, no device gets added there. You'll see how that comes into play here throughout our programming. And then all the devices that are controlled over IP don't go to a master controller, right? Because the iPad just gets to speak to them directly over the network. So we just add that to the grouping there for the IP devices. And it's going to be very, very important that we just set the correct IP address for all these devices over in the properties here. So remember in our system design we referred to, the switcher was 1.22. The video conference 1.12, the audio teleconference 1.13, Apple TV 1.11, and the Lutron is 1.23. Now the empty devices, they don't need any control, they will not be controlled, so I get to just leave them over there. And don't have to drag them over in the controlling flow tree. Flow test is purely optional, but it's just a matter of choosing devices. And if I'm on the network and these devices are live and I need it, and my wiring is all connected, then I could actually hit that play icon and test the commands out. So now we compile the project, which has created a file that the iPad can use here, and creates all of our graphics, everything automatically in the iPad. And now that brings us to Edit System, where we can see all of the various pages here in the system. It's really just the modules, okay, for the devices. And keep in mind, not everything's actually going to be in our system unless we brought it in as a single device, or as a content, I should say. But all of the behind the scenes things are down here in the second window of Edit System. We have the Variables tab, and we call this Scenarios Macros. So any events, actions that occur as a means of pressing a button. For example, I pressed Presentation, and I said we're going to create by name a macro, right? So here it is. It's there. I press the button, and in the bottom center we have our events and actions. I could move my workspace around, and I could say all of my events and actions I want to occur. So we call this ad-lib programming. We have IR, RS-232, TCP/IP, and more. So we just chose RS-232. What device do I want to control? Now we're on to our amplifier we're controlling. Output 1. Here's all the commands for the device. Here's volume XX. And what is XX value? Well, you really have to know the device you're controlling and what volume level you need. So we're just going to set it nice and comfortable there to 15%. We're going to control our switcher. Output 1. Select input 3, which is the the podium laptop. So whatever's the default source for the presentation. It's really up to you, the programmer, and to collect the information from your user on how they want to control, or how they need the room to configure. So we have the projector. I'm going to copy all those things, because I'm also going to add one more thing here before I go pasting this elsewhere, and that is how to use the trigger. You just choose the master controller, so that's the RL icon there for relay, and we chose the trigger port, and we got the options there, on, off, toggle, that sort of thing you could see. So now I'm going to take those 3 strings that I had in the presentation, and I'm going to go to video conference. And we want to do pretty much exactly the same thing, right? Except for we're not going to default to a laptop. We're going to default to the video conference codec, which is input 2 of our presentation switcher. Conference call. We don't need the projector. But I need to set the volume nice and conservatively. But also I need to switch my amplifier to select the second input. Remember, the AM220 has two inputs there. And we don't need to switch our 4x1 switch. But since I'm controlling the same device, 2 commands in a row, I'm going to put a little delay in there using that pause icon and defining it as 0.2 seconds in the properties on the right there. Save early, save often. What other macros do we have here? We've built the presentation. Here's our AV endpoint. When I press that AV endpoint, remember the power on. So just pressing that very button there and having the selected option of power on. How about presentation switch? So I'm in the presentation and I have my AV endpoint. You see there, SM_AV endpoint. Source 1, 2, 3, 4. That's where all of that lives. These source names and source numbers and all that, these are variables that the system references, but not really something you need to edit. Here's when I press Apple TV and we created a macro. Here's what all happens. Powers on the projector, switches the switcher, and switches to the correct input on the projector. So this was all automatic there. Conference call selects, the one we just built. Video conference select, everything that happens here. Power on the projector, switch the switch, and switch the projector. Video conference select, so just pressing that video conference there is turning on the projector. So since it was the AV endpoint, just making sure that projector's on, no harm in getting a head start there. How about though if I want to, in the video conference, when I select anything in the AV endpoint for video conference, we need to make sure the amplifier is on the proper input, right? So I could edit these default commands here, our default macros. Keep in mind though, if you do recompile, you'll lose the events that came in on these auto-built macros, okay? So you'll want to kind of experiment with that on your own a little bit, what you lose, what you don't. And there are kind of storage places you could put those things if need be. So remember, any of these times we're switching between presentation or audio conference, video conference, there's going to be different inputs on the AMP220 that we had to make sure about in our system design. Emulator is not really good for on the PC software because the compiled project is not really, it's designed to work on the iPad. So since I have my iPad here and the iPad is licensed, I'm going to go ahead and upload this system project, which now allows me to go to my iPad and enter my settings menu of the Compass app and go to Projects, Load from Server. And now that the project has posted to the server, it is ready to be pulled down into your licensed iOS device with the Compass Control app. You go into our settings menu, you will choose Project, Load from Server, where you will see the status update all the way up to 100%. When it's completed, you'll get the blue Start button, and by pressing that blue Start button, it will then advance you into your project. Now, a few notes and addendums. Number one is, after updating your project and loading to your iPad, once you begin, if you do not have a master controller on site, you will see an option to proceed in what is called GUI Only Mode. It takes a moment, but then you will be able to navigate through your project as if you had your live equipment. Of course, you will not be collecting any bidirectional feedback or sending any control commands to or from connected devices in the system. If you wish to avoid the delay of GUI only mode, then you should set all IP addresses to 0.0.0.0 for each of your IP devices that will be controlled via the network and master controllers. Lastly, not all devices will work immediately just by having the correct IP address information. And for more information on how to get your sophisticated devices up and running, we have a web page dedicated to this topic, and it is called our Module Manuals. They're all viewed on KeyDigital.com. We go to Products under the Compass Control section and our bidirectional partner modules page. And you need to log in for the page version with module downloads and module manuals. So it'll ask you for your certified credentials, and now you will see the column Module Manual. For example, for Apple TV control over IP, we must actually control or pair, the iPads with the Apple TV. And here we have the instructions on doing so. Similarly, for this specific project, there are additional module manuals for the Clear One 880T, and perhaps other devices as well. And this module manuals page is a really excellent resource for viewing the module before loading to your system.